Citizen Kane is a drama film released by RKO Radio Pictures on September 5th, 1941. The film was co-written between Herman Mankiewicz and Orson Welles, the latter of whom also directed, produced, and starred in the titular role of Charles Foster Kane. This marked Orson Welles' first foray into filmmaking, with most of his cast consisting of his crew from Mercury Theater Productions. Citizen Kane is frequently cited as one of, if not the greatest film ever made, to the point that it is ingrained in the public's cultural lexicon, acting as a benchmark with which the quality of almost all films is now compared. Just think about how many times you've heard phrases such as, "I like that movie, but it was no Citizen Kane," or, "It may be the next Citizen Kane, but it doesn't get my vote," or even, "That movie's Citizen Kane compared to this dumpster fire." When talking about Citizen Kane, many will instantly feel a certain reverence just saying the film's name, like it was conceived on a different plane of existence from ours. Many people shy away from talking about it because there's this idea that only the cultured auteurs and intellectual thinkers of the world are qualified to discuss it. What can I say about this film that hasn't already been said? Well, what can we say about it? This movie was made to be viewed by audiences in theaters, so what can the untrained eye say about this landmark of cinematic history? In this review, we're going to dive into Citizen Kane and explore in depth, in the shallow end, what makes this movie tick. Just as a warning to those of you who haven't seen this movie, there will be major spoilers ahead. If you still want to see the movie for yourself, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The story of Citizen Kane begins with the death of famed newspaper magnate Charles Foster Kane, with specific focus being placed on his last word, Rosebud. The events following Kane's death are seen through the eyes of a reporter who has been tasked with interviewing people Kane once knew, in an effort to understand his last word, and subsequently write an article about it for his employers. The reporter's investigation sees him seeking counsel from 5 different sources: the diary of Kane's guardian, Walter Thatcher, the Enquirer's manager, Mr. Bernstein, his former friend, Jedediah Leland, his second wife, Susan Alexander, and his butler, Raymond. Each source provides their own unique insight on pivotal moments of Charles Foster Kane's life. The reporter comes to learn about the complicated circumstances of Kane being adopted by Walter Thatcher from his parents, and how his rocky relationship with Thatcher led him to become the publisher of the Enquirer. The reporter learns about Kane's constant push to do more with his life, and how this desire to prove himself led to the end of his fledgling political career, both of his marriages, and his lifelong friendship with Jedediah Leland. When the reporter completes his investigation, in the midst of the cataloging and appraisal of Kane's belongings, he muses on all he has learned, reflecting openly to his peers on the futility of trying to understand the full scope of a person's life, and how one dying word, especially one as innocuous as Rosebud, doesn't have the profundity to explain it. In the final moments of the film, we flash to teams of workers rummaging through Kane's belongings, separating valuables from junk. As we watch the workers throw the junk into a furnace, we get a good look at one particular piece that's tossed into the flames. An old wooden sled with the word Rosebud painted on it. The same sled Kane had played with as a child, the day he was taken from his family. Before getting into the content of the story, it's worth noting that one of the biggest reasons Citizen Kane is regarded as one of the greats is because of the technical work taking place behind the camera. Terminology such as deep focus camera work, chiaroscuro lighting, and the use of montage are frequently referenced by the film's admirers as techniques that helped refine the art of movie making as we know it. While the production team for the movie should be commended for their work, it's also important to put it into some kind of context. The average movie audience is typically more concerned about what's happening on the screen instead of the work happening behind it. While visuals are undoubtedly a critical part of making a movie entertaining, They can only go so far, especially if what's happening on screen isn't particularly interesting. In Citizen Kane's case, the visuals work as a means of enriching what the audience sees on screen. Tricks such as the camera wipe during the dining room time-lapse, the camera panning up into the rafters at Susan's Opera House debut, and the news on the march reel all immediately create atmosphere for their respective scenes, and give the audience a concrete idea of what's happening and the impact it is having. The movie does an excellent job of implementing visuals as a way to carry its story forward, as opposed to attempting to substitute the story like some movies are known to do. There are many people who would say that in terms of how the movie is shot, it feels much more like a modern-day movie than something you could expect from the 1940s. So with such remarkable technical quality, the story is naturally going to be just as good, right? Well, that's honestly going to depend on who's watching. The story's quite engaging, and it invites the viewer to ponder what they're seeing, but most people likely aren't going to walk away from this movie feeling like their eyes were open to a whole new world of cinema. The movie's not for everyone. Citizen Kane tells its story in a very fragmented fashion, with flashbacks to different periods of Kane's life seemingly popping up on screen at a whim. This can possibly be attributed to the fluid nature of the conversations between the reporter and his sources, lending a more human quality to the interaction, while still giving us fresh insight into who Kane was. The dialogue and the acting within every scene is top tier, and it goes a long way in engaging the audience and helping them feel invested in every new revelation. With that being said, though, it will still require a bit of patience and focus to sit through the movie's narrative leapfrogging in order to get all the information you need. One of the most fascinating character development techniques this movie uses comes from how it chooses to illustrate Kane's life. We as the audience spend a lot of time with various characters that teach us about who Kane was as a person in the pivotal moments of his life, and we get to learn how driven Kane was as a person. But all we really get are moments. No matter how much time we spend listening to these characters tell us about Kane, their stories are more of a reflection of who they are as characters, and why Kane had such a grand influence on their lives. There's always a lingering feeling that when it comes to Kane's life, we're being kept at arm's length. We never get to hear from Kane himself what exactly is driving him to make his decisions, and how he sees the world around him. The closest we get to this is the scene where he meets his second wife, Susan, for the first time.
I was on my way to the Western Manhattan warehouse, in search of my youth. You see, my mother died a long time ago, and her things were put in storage out west. There wasn't any other place to put them. Thought I'd send for them now, and tonight I was going to take a look at them. You know, a sort of sentimental journey.
While initially it would seem that Kane is looking out for the interests of those who have been abandoned, it soon becomes apparent that he just wants the love and adoration of those he commits his time and service to. Is this a vain attempt to try and fill a hole that was left from having to leave his family? If that's the case, why does he push so hard to the point that he runs for governor of the state? What's stopping him from giving love back to those who have given it to him? Though we learn a great deal about Kane in the time we have, we're nowhere close to understanding him. The end of the movie hammers this point home when we see Rosebud burning away. Even after learning that the sled was on his mind, and being able to put together that it was him longing for a return to childhood, or a life he never got to live, we're still left with a lot more questions than answers. What did he miss about his family? What did he hope to change about his life? What regrets burned on his conscience the strongest? While being left to our own guesses will be a delight for some viewers, it will come as a major agitation for others who had hoped that the story would tell itself before the screen went black. In summary, the movie is without a doubt a technical masterpiece for its time, with parts of the technical work still shining bright even by today's standards. The story's quite engaging, but it is a movie that provides a great deal more questions than answers. Most of this movie's staying power comes from how it sticks in your brain like an earworm and forces you to think about what you saw. This will be great for some, but if you're more in the vein of moviegoers that treat movies as an avenue of escapism, you may end up being bored more often than not. There are also a couple of scenes where the blocking feels awkward, with actors being crammed into the frame. There's also some inconsistent makeup on some of the actors, with the aging looking noticeably better on some as opposed to others. These are minor gripes to be sure, and certainly not worth making a whole video around, but flaws that should be pointed out nonetheless. The final rating of this movie, according to just one set of untrained eyes, is 8.5 out of 10. It's an enjoyable movie that will help you better appreciate filmmaking if you care about such a thing. But if you're just there to watch a movie, then it's a compelling and thought-provoking character study that will pleasantly kill a couple hours of time, and possibly a couple more afterwards if you're dead set on wrapping your head around it. With that being said, thanks for stopping by. If you enjoyed listening to all that uneducated rambling, consider sticking around. Maybe leaving a like and subscribing if you choose, and if you have any recommendations for reviews you want to see in the future, be sure to drop them down in the comments. There's plenty more to come, so if you care about that, I'll see you when I see you.